this topic was fresh on the founders' minds because the very first law of the United States of America enacted in the first session of the first Congress on 1 June 1789 was Statute 1, Chapter 1, an act to regulate the time and manner of administering certain oaths, which established the oath required by civil and military officials to support the Constitution. The Founding Fathers agreed upon the importance of ensuring that officials promised their allegiance. Indeed, very little debate occurred before the first Congress passed this very first statute. But the current oath is more than a mere formality that adds to the pageantry of a commissioning or promotion ceremony. It provides a foundation for leadership decisions.
It's a promise that every service member takes when they enter the armed forces. Every man and every woman who puts on the uniform of the United States takes the same oath. It's an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And it links the generations together. Those words have been spoken by generations of Americans, stretching back to the earliest days. Union and Confederate soldiers wrestled with that meaning during the Civil War. Every generation since, everyone has taken that oath.
The oath's message. So some people may think that the focus on the oath and our founding fathers is merely just a patriotic thing, a feel-good rhetoric, and may question the significance of the oath in today's environment. It has very applicable meaning in peace and in conflict. And right now we're definitely in conflict, our U.S. military in the Middle East. The act of reaffirming the oath of office should serve to guide all officers when they find themselves in difficult situations.
In the United States, the military is bound by the law, by tradition, and by an oath that points beyond politics of the moment. And I think that's probably why it still resonates today. Because when young recruits raise their hand and repeat those words, they're joining a chain that stretches across nearly 2.5 centuries of American history. Chain of service, chain of duty, chain of fidelity to the Constitution. As long as Americans continue to take it seriously, it remains one of the strongest safeguards of the Republic.
Good day, everybody. This is James McBride, and we are here recording Fire for Effect podcast, episode 33, and we're recording this on March 5th. This topic today, we're going to talk about the oath of office. And Marcus Moyer is here as co-host, and he and I are both former U.S. Marines, both retired after 20 plus years. And, of course, took our oath very seriously. And before I turn over to Marcus, just for a quick intro, I just wanted to say that this was inspired, this topic was just inspired a long time ago, at least in my case. The oath is important to all of us and has been for a long time, but in particular, I came across this article in an Air Force magazine. And it pains me to say that as a U.S. Marine, but in an Air Force magazine, and the article was called "The Oath of Office: A Historical Guide to Moral Leadership" by Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Keskel, Keskel, U.S. Air Force, and he broke down the history and the moral importance and the gravity of the oath of office that all military members take, and was able to show how it should guide how we lead in the military, whether you're enlisted or officer. We'll focus more on the officer side of things today. So I'll get into the introduction here in a second. Good day, Marcus. How are you doing?
Doing well, Jim. Great to be back with you again this week, and really looking forward to this topic. As you said, it's holds a special place in each of our hearts, having spent more than 20 years in the Marine Corps. And if you count my time at the academy, 24 years that I've been under this particular oath that we're going to talk about today. So right out of high school, I went to I got my appointment to West Point from then Congressman Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. And so that was my first experience taking the oath of office, was when I went to West Point. And of course, that place is steeped in tradition anyway, and not just the oath that we take as military members, but they have a code at West Point: duty, honor, and country. You know, the three words that every cadet at West Point learns to live by. And it's the oath, those mottos, those things exist as rallying points, is what General MacArthur called it. It's something that's meaningful but easy to remember, that acts as kind of a North Star throughout your entire career to guide your actions and behavior, especially when things get confusing. You have to have something to fall back on that guides you through those challenging times. And that's the purpose of the oath. That's the purpose of these mottos. Um, and Lieutenant Colonel Keskel did a fantastic job in this article. It's the best breakdown of the oath I've ever read, for sure. And I think every individual who raises their right hand and swears to support and defend the Constitution of the United States would benefit by reading this article. So thanks for bringing it up today. It's going to be a good
Yeah,
discussion.
hands down. My history, because I enlisted in 1992 out of Montana as enlisted Marine first, and then went into ROTC, got an ROTC scholarship to Tulane University in New Orleans. So, of course, I said the oath as enlisted Marine. I said the oath again as an ROTC midshipman, and then I got commissioned in 1997. Said the oath again in 1997. And honestly, I mean, it's an important. Every time it's an important event with a lot of gravity behind it.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your full name. Do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That I take this obligation freely, without mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office of which I am about to enter. So help me God. Congratulations, Second Lieutenant of Charlie Company.
Raise your right hand, repeat after me. Has a lot of gravity behind it. But honestly, who actually, including myself, who actually studies the words of why I'm saying what I'm saying, or why anyone says the words that they say in the oath? And again, like you said, this article breaks that down very, very well. And I discovered it. So I was a Marine captain in Iraq, company commander, an airfield company commander at Al Taqaddum Airfield in Iraq. And there was several lieutenants in our squadron, and whenever we had any downtime, we tried to do some just some PME, professional military education. And I was only one of a handful of captains in the squadron, so I offered to teach some PME on leadership. And I don't know where I came across this article, but I was in Iraq then in 2007. This article was written in 2002. And I remember thinking at the time, man, this is an old article. This is, 5 years old. And now here we are in 2026, and it's still just as powerful today as it was back then. And I've kept it with me ever since 2007 when I had it and presented this class. So I'll jump right into. We're both really going to use the structure of the article, and just a lot of it will be reading right out of the article to give due credit to Lieutenant Colonel Keskel, because it's such a fabulous job. Going to edit some things and give our commentary along the way. So before I jump into the article, I'm going to turn over to Marcus for to kind of give us a little bit of context that applies to today as to why we're talking about this.
Yeah, thanks. The oath it's always important at all times, but it's especially relevant in light of current events that have gone on. The elephant in the room is the conflict that's going on in Iran right now. The last few days, the events in the Middle East have really moved at remarkable speed. The United States and its allies, as everybody knows, has launched this major military campaign against Iran. We've already struck hundreds, maybe thousands of targets, and the tensions over their nuclear program, regional activities that have been going on for almost the last 50 years, finally erupted into this open conflict. And reports have indicated that U.S. forces have struck their missile infrastructures, their naval assets, command centers. Iran has retaliated with missiles and drone attacks on American positions in the region. The conflict continues, and then there's another conflict concurrently that's going on right here in Washington D.C., and it's a constitutional battle. Members of Congress recently attempted to invoke the War Powers Resolution. That law was passed in 1973. Its intent was to ensure that Congress retains this constitutional authority over war. We talked about this over the last couple episodes as well. The Senate voted this week on a resolution that would have required the president to obtain explicit congressional authorization before continuing military action against Iran. That measure failed, leaving the current campaign largely under the authority of the executive branch. And it's very apropos that we just got done with a 3-part series on Hamilton versus Madison that specifically spoke to this. How much authority should the executive have? And moments like this that we're in right now raise a question that is literally as old as the Republic itself. Who decides when America goes to war? Is it Congress, which the Constitution gives powers to declare war, or is it the president who serves as the commander-in-chief and then has to act quickly in a time of crisis? And that debate has been around for as long as the country has. It was a big topic of the Federalist Papers, which we just talked about over the last 3 episodes. And that debate now continues. It has continued. It was a topic during Korea, during Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and now, once again, in the Persian Gulf with Iran. There's another dimension, though, to military conflict, especially with this tension between the legislative and the executive branch. There's another dimension to that story that often doesn't make the headlines. And recent comments from leadership at the United States Naval Academy reignited this discussion about the role of military officers in the nation's political and constitutional life. So Lieutenant General Berschulte, Superintendent of the United States Naval Academy, recently had this to say.
Brigade, good morning. As you have seen in the news, our joint force has begun military operations against Iran. For decades, Iran has waged a proxy war against American forces and our partners across the Middle East. The events now unfolding are historic, they are consequential, and they demand serious reflection from all of us. For some of your company mates who have only recently graduated, this is no longer theoretical. It is not a case study. It is not a classroom discussion. It is real, very real. They are likely participating in these operations today. standing watch, flying sorties, leading sailors and Marines, executing missions on behalf of our great country. They are carrying the weight of decisions that matter. Soon enough, that responsibility will be yours. This moment should sharpen your perspective. The fate of nations, the stability of regions, and the lives of your fellow Americans are not abstract ideas. They rest in the hands of officers who are competent, disciplined, and morally grounded. The fate of the Iranian people, like so many populations caught under regimes that choose hostility over peace, will ultimately be shaped in part by how professionally and decisively American forces conduct themselves. You've heard me talk about warfighting and our focus on it. What you are seeing in the news is an example of why we must be ready, always ready. Warfighting is not a slogan, it is the core purpose of our Navy and Marine Corps. It requires intellectual rigor in the classroom, physical toughness on the field, and professional seriousness in every training evolution. It requires leaders who understand history, technology, human behavior, and the moral weight of command. It requires officers who can think clearly under pressure and act decisively in uncertainty. This is not a time for distraction. It is not a time for complacency. It is a time to double down. Double down academically. Master your disciplines. Whether you study engineering, cyber, political science, or literature, your ability to think critically will shape your effectiveness in combat. Double down athletically. Physical resilience underpins combat effectiveness. The demands placed on junior officers in operational units are unrelenting. Double down professionally. Treat every formation, every brief, every watch, and every leadership opportunity as preparation for the day when the stakes become real. Our mission remains clear: to develop midshipmen morally, mentally, and physically, and to imbue you with the highest ideals of duty, honor, and loyalty. Those ideals are not ornamental. They are operational necessities. History does not ask whether we feel ready. It simply arrives. We are not simply another college. Our responsibility is far greater. We will prepare you accordingly. I look forward to fighting alongside you. Go Navy and Semper Fidelis.
So those remarks remind Americans of something that every midshipman learns on the first day they raise their right hand at Annapolis. Every cadet at West Point or at the Air Force Academy, they swear an oath. Not an oath to the president. It's not an oath to a political party. They swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that oath is taken by every soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, and guardsman who enters into the service of the United States. It's one of the defining features of the American military. One of the things that distinguishes our armed forces from those of many other nations around the world and throughout history. In monarchies, soldiers swear loyalty to a king. In dictatorships, they swear loyalty to a regime. But in the United States, the oath binds the military to something that is stronger and more enduring than that. It binds them to the Constitution. And that raises an important question, especially at a moment when the nation is once again debating war, presidential authority, the limits of power, and the proper and lawful use of military force. What exactly does the oath mean? Where did it come from? How has it shaped the character of the American military and the founding of the Republic to the present day? That is the topic today. That's what we're going to explore, because long before the headlines in Iran, before the War Powers Act, before the modern debates over presidential authority, the founders of this country understood something essential, and that is a free republic can only survive if those who are entrusted with the sword are ultimately loyal not to a man, but to the law. And that loyalty begins with a single sentence, spoken with your right hand raised, I do solemnly swear. And today we're going to look at that oath through the lens of this article that Jim was mentioning by Lieutenant Colonel Keskel, Air Force, written in 2002. Lieutenant Colonel Keskel served as the Chief of Programs and Organization Branch, Directorate of Manpower and Organization, Headquarters, Air Force Combat Command, Langley Air Force Base, Virginia. He previously served as the Deputy Commander for the 374th Support Group in Yokota Air Base in Japan, Commander of the 2nd Mission Support Squadron, Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, Chief, Manpower and Organization Division, U.S. Southern Command, Miami, Florida, and Q Heights, Panama, Chief, Manpower Office, 384th Bombardment Wing, and 22nd Aerial Refueling Wing, McConnell Air Force Base, Kansas, Chief, Manpower Systems Development, Headquarters, United States Air Force, Pentagon, Washington, D.C., and Research Analyst, Air Force Management Engineering Agency, Randolph Air Force Base in Texas. Colonel Keskel is a graduate of the Squadron Officer School, Intermediate Service School, Rand Fellow, and the Air War College. And as I said at the outset, this is one of the best analysis of our oath of office that I've ever come across. And every individual who swears to support and defend the Constitution of this great country would do well and benefit by reading it.
Absolutely. Good introduction. Good comments there from the current superintendent of the United States Naval Academy, Lieutenant General Borg Schulte. And I served with him in 3rd Marine Air Wing when he was a 1-star brigadier general, and he was the assistant wing commander for 3rd Marine Air Wing several years ago. So he's a phenomenal communicator, phenomenal leader. So a great current day reminder of why this oath is so important. And as Marcus said a few minutes ago, we just finished a 3-part series talking about different perspectives from Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. And this topic was fresh on the founders' minds because the very first law of the United States of America enacted in the first session of the first Congress on 1 June 1789 was Statute 1, Chapter 1, an act to regulate the time and manner of administering certain oaths, which established the oath required by civil and military officials to support the Constitution. The Founding Fathers agreed upon the importance of ensuring that officials promised their allegiance. Indeed, very little debate occurred before the first Congress passed this very first statute. The current oath is more than a mere formality that adds to the pageantry of a commissioning or promotion ceremony. It provides a foundation for leadership decisions, and that's what's really cool about this article. Is he really teases out every element of this oath and why and how it should impact how military enlisted and officers lead in the military. Just before commissioning or enlisting, every officer candidate and enlistee recites an oath. The President of the United States takes an oath before assuming duties. Senators, congressmen, judges, and other government officials take oaths of office. New citizens of the United States take a naturalization oath. Many school children take an oath or pledge of allegiance to the flag. Although its members are not required to swear or affirm before going into combat, the U.S. military developed a code of conduct to guide servicemen. When an officer is promoted, the promotion ceremony includes a restatement of the officer's oath. And again, as General Borg Schulte just showed in that message to the midshipmen, if you don't know, Navy midshipmen includes midshipmen that will become U.S. Marines as well, Navy and Marines. Really highlighted the importance, essentially, of this oath, especially in light of the combat operations going on right now in the Middle East.
Yeah, first of all, I think it's fascinating that was the first thing that they addressed, that the Founding Fathers addressed, as you pointed out, as the first law of the United States of America, enacted in that first session of Congress in 1789. So clearly it was important to them, and for good reason. According to Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, an oath is a solemn, usually formal, calling upon God or a god to witness to the truth of what one says or to witness that one sincerely intends to do what one says. A solemn attestation of the truth or inviolability of one's words. An oath is a solemn appeal to God to witness the truth in a statement or the sincerity of a promise, coupled with an imprecation of divine judgment in the event of falsehood or a breach of obligation. So at the outset, it sets the foundation in the founder's mind that we're doing something very serious here, and an oath is appropriate, where we pledge to do this thing in the sight of God and acknowledging the consequences if we don't keep our word. That definition of the oath that we just talked about is captured in the Hippocratic Oath, one of the world's oldest and most famous. I swear, according to my ability and judgment, I will keep this oath with purity and with holiness. I will pass my life and practice my art. While I continue to keep this oath unviolated, may it be granted to me to enjoy life and the practice of the art, respected by all men in all times. But should I trespass and violate this oath, may the reverse be my lot. So several concepts in this oath still resonate in the one that's taken by today's military officer. A call to a higher power, a statement to perform to the best of one's ability, a sense of honor and acknowledgement of the consequences of failing to live up to one's word. And in the United States, oaths have been a part of our makeup from the earliest days. In 1620, when the Mayflower landed, the Pilgrims established the Mayflower Compact, which served as an oath, a covenant, and a constitution. While developing the oath of office for U.S. officers, the Founding Fathers had serious concerns about pledging allegiance to any specific person. And as we talked about in the opening, no oath in the United States requires allegiance to any person. Our oath is to the Constitution. It is ironic, though, that even patriots like George Washington and John Adams initially had taken an oath and sworn allegiance to the King of England. And then later, they broke that oath. But they explained why in the Declaration of Independence, why it was necessary to violate or not to honor their original oath to the king. In the Declaration of Independence, they acknowledged that sometimes one must go against their former pledge. The Declaration of Independence says governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. So not only did the founders have concerns and objections to pledging allegiance to any specific person, they specifically intended that their previous oath to the King of England should, in no uncertain terms, be rescinded and nullified. During the Revolutionary War, General Washington issued a general order on 7th of May, 1778, that required all officers to take and subscribe to an oath renouncing King George III and supporting the United States. And this is what that general order said. I do acknowledge the United States of America to be free, independent, and sovereign states, and declare that the people thereof owe no allegiance or obedience to George III, King of Great Britain, and I renounce, refuse, and abjure any allegiance or obedience to him, and I do swear or affirm that I will, to the utmost of my power, support, maintain, and defend the said United States against the said King George III, his heirs and successors, and his and their abettors, assistants, and adherents, and will serve the said United States in the office of, whatever that office happened to be, which I now hold with fidelity, according to the best of my skill and understanding. So I think they made their intentions very clear. But prior to 1789, the constitutional requirement to take an oath, this general order of Washington's had significant weight. On the 1st of October in 1779, Washington court-martialed Benjamin Ballard for quote, selling rum, flour, pork, hides, tallow, and other stores, the property of the public without any orders or authority for doing so, and contrary to the tenor of his bond and oath of office. So that example shows that the oath represented more than just a simple ceremonial formality that they did just for pageantry during a promotion ceremony. First official oath for the U.S. military officers under the Constitution was established in June of 1789. Article 6 of the Constitution states that senators and representatives before mentioned and members of the several state legislatures and all executive and judicial officers both of the United States and of the several states shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. The 37th Congress, so you fast forward several decades, the 37th Congress passed an all-encompassing 176-word oath for all government officials, including military officers, to verify their loyalty during the Civil War. Obviously, loyalty was a lot of people's loyalty was in question during the Civil War, since 11 of the 22 states decided they were going to go their own way. So this all-encompassing oath that was passed by the 37th Congress was to verify the loyalty of military members during the Civil War. It was called the Ironclad Test Oath, that included a background check to ensure that government officials were not supporting or had not supported the Confederacy, and two, a part that addressed future performance. Many of those words remain in today's oath. And that legislation specified that failure to comply with the oath constituted perjury. This is a serious thing. Constituted perjury, and violators would incur the associated penalties, thus formalizing the implied concept that officers are accountable for failing to live up to their oath. There have been no less than 19 pieces of legislation that address the oath of office. So clearly, it is important to the founders. And clearly, in the decades, centuries that followed, the importance of the oath was maintained, as evidenced by the litany of legislation that addressed it.
Yeah, and one distinction I want to point out is back for the first portion of the oath, during about a 60-year period in our history, both officers and enlisted took the same oath, which was required by Congress in April 1790. And then the oath used the wording to bear true faith and allegiance to the United States of America, as you pointed out, rather than to support the Constitution. But it retained the concept of allegiance to the nation as a whole. It constituted one of 16 sections in an act that regulated the military establishment, the forerunner of today's authorization acts. And then Congress periodically updated these authorization acts, although the oath remained constant, with one minor addition in 1795. And as you pointed out, in 37th Congress in 1862 was when the officer oath became separate from the illicit oath again. So the oath that we're going to focus on in the rest of this article is we're going to take it line by line and talk about the officer oath specifically. And if you Google, you can see that both oaths are very similar, but the officer oath has some distinct differences. So the oath's message. Some people may think that the focus on the oath and our founding fathers is merely just a patriotic thing, a feel-good rhetoric, and may question the significance of the oath in today's environment. As we already pointed out with showing General Borg-Schulte's message, it has very applicable meaning in peace and in conflict. And right now we're definitely in conflict, our U.S. military in the Middle East. The act of reaffirming the oath of office should serve to guide all officers when they find themselves in difficult situations. The brief history of the oath makes the significance of its wording more apparent. The oath provides enduring guidance for military officers, and each part carries its own history and message. So we'll start off, very first line, I, usually it's said, state your name. So I, first name, last name, do solemnly swear or affirm. So that's the first line. The oath begins with an option to swear or affirm. Although current common law places less religious connotation on the word swear, the term oath clearly had such a connotation in the late 1700s. In fact, the original legislation referred to an oath or affirmation. Recognizing that some religious groups, such as the Quakers, might object to swearing to a supreme being, or that someone may not believe in a supreme being, Congress provided the option to affirm instead. This wording is also consistent with the option for the president to swear or affirm as prescribed in Article 2 of the Constitution. Either way, the oath signifies a public statement of personal commitment. Officers must take personal responsibility for their actions.
The next phrase in the oath is that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. To understand the opening pledge, one should know and understand the Constitution. Upon commission or reaffirming it upon promotion, too few officers take the time to read and study the document that they swear to support and defend. The oath requires officers to support and defend the Constitution, not the president, not the country, not the flag, and not a particular military service. Yet at the same time, the Constitution symbolizes the president, the country, the flag, the military, and much more. Preamble to the Constitution succinctly highlights the ideals represented by that document. Because the Constitution was built on a series of checks and balances that distribute power across the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, officers must give their allegiance to all three entities, despite the fact that the chain of command leads to the president. These checks and balances create an inefficiency inherent in America's democratic system that often proves frustrating for military officers whose environment tries to provide the most efficient and effective fighting force available. And as an aside here, I think Jim and I could both attest to that. The inefficiencies of government run counter to everything that we learn in the military, where we're trying to be as effective and efficient as possible. The government that we work under does not have those same goals, and it's not a bug. It's a feature of the design. The checks and balances that created an inefficiency that's inherent in America's system of government, which they felt compelled to restrain for the reasons outlined in the Federalist Papers that we talked about over the last several weeks. In his book, George Friedman, his book, The Storm Before the Calm, he said that the founders' solution to the invention of this government that they had created was to make it inefficient. Friedman said, the founders' remarkably inefficient system of government did what it was designed to do. It did little, and the little that it did poorly. And that is a frustrating thing to work under as a military officer whose sole purpose in everything is to be as effective and efficient as possible. And so that all comes to a head when you find yourself at the end of your career sitting in the Pentagon. You are now a part of the big, inefficient machine, and it is frustrating. It can be very frustrating. But anyway, back to Lieutenant Colonel Keskel's article. These checks and balances, as he said, create an inefficiency inherent in America's democratic system that often proves frustrating for military officers, check, whose environment tries to provide the most efficient and effective fighting force available. The original oath in 1789 mentioned only that one must support the Constitution, although many people may at first consider the phrase support and defend as a single thought. Each word carries a slightly different connotation. George Washington conveys the notion of support in his farewell address. He says, the basis of our political system is the right of the people to make and alter their constitution of government. But the Constitution, which at any time exists, till changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all. The very idea of the power and the right of the people to establish government presupposes the duty of every individual to obey the established government. And again, as we've talked about in recent episodes, we've become very comfortable with circumnavigating that Washingtonian view of the Constitution and the obligation to follow it as it exists until it's changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, not just one federal judge, In previous episodes, specifically the episode on the separation of church and state and the three-part series on Hamilton versus Madison, we explored this modern technique of reinterpreting the Constitution rather than going to the trouble of amending it, what Jefferson referred to as seeing what meaning can be squeezed out of the existing text. Counter to what Washington just described, as Lieutenant Colonel Keskel just laid it out. Lieutenant Colonel Keskel goes on to say that the words "and defend" were added in 1862 during the Civil War, when defense and preservation of the nation became paramount. In the footnotes of Lieutenant Colonel Keskel's article, he mentions in this section that part of President Abraham Lincoln's justification for the Emancipation Proclamation demonstrates the thinking of the era. Lincoln said, "I felt that measures otherwise unconstitutional might become lawful by becoming indispensable to the preservation of the Constitution through the preservation of the nation." So Lincoln already kind of had that expansionist, purposivist view of the Constitution, where sometimes in order to save it, you have to break it. Seems to be what he's saying here. Back to Lieutenant Colonel Keskel's the text of his article. The passive pledge to support was expanded to include an active requirement to defend. So passive versus an active view of the Constitution, the duty to not just passively support it, but to actively defend it was added by this phrase. The phrase support and defend the Constitution is purposely vague, allowing better minds to interpret and improve within certain guidelines. To understand the significance of the wording, one should compare the U.S. oath to the Soviet version, the latter requiring officers unquestioningly to carry out the requirements of all military regulations and orders of commanders and superiors. It is a true blessing, Keskel writes, that America does not require its officers to obey unquestioningly, but gives them the opportunity and flexibility for innovation. But with that flexibility comes both responsibility and accountability for one's actions. And we will get into that nuance in greater detail toward the end.
Yeah, and when "and defend" was added, a nice segue from defending the Constitution is defend against what? And the next phrase in the oath is against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that phrase was added in 1862 as a direct result of the Civil War, specifically to address the possibility of Union soldiers joining the Confederacy, most notably the forces commanded by General Robert E. Lee. That is, people who had previously sworn allegiance to the United States were now fighting against it. Although people now have little concern about another civil war, depending on who you talk to, our military must still prepare for all enemies and contingencies. The terrorist attack of September 11th, 2001, of course, caught many Americans off guard. The response to the launching of fighter escorts shows how the nation's leadership faced the dilemma of flying combat air patrols over the United States, defending the Constitution, while trying to comply with current laws on Posse Comitatus. It's a Latin phrase that literally translates to, quote, power of the country, or sometimes the force or ability of the country. In its original and traditional legal sense, rooted in English common law and carried over to the United States, it refers to the authority of a county sheriff, for example, or similar to local peace officer, to summon or mobilize a group of able-bodied civilians or citizens to assist in maintaining public order, suppressing lawlessness, pursuing criminals, making arrests, serving legal writs, or handling emergencies like riots or rescues. The group of people assembled, often simply called a posse in everyday language, such as in Western movies. Let's round up the posse. Let's go get them, boys, where a sheriff rounds up a posse to chase outlaws. This concept dates back to medieval times and was a way for local law enforcement to draw on community resources when needed, without relying on a standing military or professional police force. In the modern U.S. context, the term is most famously associated with the Posse Comitatus Act, passed in 1878 and codified under 18 U.S. Code 1385, a federal law that prohibits the use of the U.S. military, originally the Army, later expanded to include the Air Force, and interpreted to cover all the other services, as a domestic law enforcement tool. So again, it prohibits the use of the U.S. military as a domestic law enforcement tool, i.e., it bars federal troops from acting as, quote, as a posse comitatus or otherwise, unquote, to execute civilian laws, except when expressly authorized by the Constitution or an act of Congress. So that was just a quick segue there on Posse Comitatus.
That's good.
So the military officers cannot simply maintain the status quo. They must look toward the future, identifying emerging trends and develop capabilities to counter the entire range of threats. Apparently, our current capability to respond to and, more importantly, prevent a future asymmetric attack is inadequate. And again, remember, this was written in 2002, just a year after September 11th. So September 11th, 2001 was fresh on Lieutenant Colonel Kesker's mind. Officers must ensure that they address all enemies and not merely advocate service-centric needs at the expense of national requirements. Yeah, so that's a really good point he makes about officers must ensure that they address all enemies and not merely advocate for service-centric needs. Because there has been throughout our history, and there still is, and there's a healthy, service rivalry between the services. The Marine Corps is better than the Air Force better than the Army, all that. Now we have Space Force, of course, and that inter-service rivalry is healthy to a point because it keeps all the services sharp, and trying to be the most cost-effective and lethal, force in the military. However, it can go too far to where we stop looking holistically at threats and stop recognizing, or if we're blinded to the fact that one particular service has a advantage in one area that helps defend the country or make the country better at fighting and winning wars, which is what it's all about with the Department of Defense. When this was written, it was called the Department of Defense. Now it's called the Department of War, or the War Department, which I think is a good change because it focuses us as to what we are designed to be able to do, which is fight and win wars and battles in order to provide defense for the country. But I think the renaming to Department of War was a good name change.
Yeah, I agree. I always thought that sounded way cooler. You go back to the Civil War days, and Lincoln's talking about the War Department. Sounds way cooler than Department of Defense. It's active, not passive.
Yep. Right.
Yeah, we are supposed to be, all branches working toward the same goal. That rivalry does exist, and it's got its benefits. And I just want to say, in terms of who's the most cost effective, the Marine Corps did just pass another audit. Just saying.
The only service to do so.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah,
and you have a role in that, I believe. That's
supporting and
part of your
defending.
background.
I do, and I'm grateful to still be able to swim in those waters after retirement. Still get to hang out with Marines all day, and still be a part of the organization that I love. So yeah, we're up to the point now in the oath. We talked about supporting and defending the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The next phrase is that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, meaning that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution. The phrase faith and allegiance dates back to at least 1606, when King James required an oath of the uttermost faith and allegiance to the King's Majesty, unquote, from everyone leaving for America to work in the Virginia Company. However, the officer's oath ensures allegiance to the Constitution as a whole, not just the president. Officers should pledge allegiance to the nation as a whole rather than their military service or their organization, an idea reminiscent of the Air Force's core value of service before self. However, officers must not construe service as U.S. Air Force. However, officers must not construe service to mean U.S. Air Force. The Army's core value of selfless service provides a clearer connotation of the notion of serving others. Furthermore, the Air Force's guide on core values discusses maintaining faith in the system, which includes not just the military system, but the system of democratic government embodied in the Constitution. Even though the Constitution built a system of checks and balances to embrace multiple branches of government, the Founding Fathers cautioned against counterproductive parochialism. In his inaugural address, Washington warned, "I behold the surest pledges that as on one side no local prejudices or attachments, no separate views nor party animosities, will misdirect the comprehensive and equal eye which ought to watch over this great assemblage. Officers' allegiance compels them to work together to develop the best solutions for the nation, rather than engage in inter-service competition to obtain the biggest piece of the defense budget." And I will say there's a healthy amount of that still goes on, vying for a bigger piece of the defense budget. That's what I get to do now. Marine Corps is not even close to having the biggest piece of the defense budget, though.
Oh, no, not even close. One cool thing about serving in the Pentagon, mixture of coolness and frustration, is it's a joint force. Like, it's truly the joint force. All the services, working together with some healthy competition thrown in there, sometimes unhealthy, but overall working together. Under the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, looking at how to integrate the services' strengths into a national cohesive fighting force. And it's cool to see that. I'm glad I ended my career there, just to experience that, and to really, where you really see strategy for the kind of the first time, because short of that, it's mostly tactics and operations in the military. And the Marines and the Navy get a decent dose of this, because when the Marines deploy on Marine Expeditionary Units or Marine Expeditionary Brigades, it's with the Navy. We deploy as a joint service and joint force. So that's a great experience to see. So, but the Pentagon takes it to a whole other level. Working with the Air Force, the Army, and the Space Force, and the Coast Guard, it's really a pretty cool thing to see.
Yeah, so I still work with the Marine Corps and specifically Marine Aviation. And so, and that's what I did for 20 years. So obviously I think Marine Aviation is the most important thing in the world. But to Lieutenant Colonel Keskel's point, we're compelled to work together to develop the best solutions for the nation, rather than engage in this inter-service competition or even a particular MOS within a particular service. And so, as hard as it is for me to admit sometimes, as you said, it's a joint force. Working at the Pentagon, though, has opened my eyes to some of that. There are other things on the battlefield besides Marine Aviation. And sometimes I might lose a piece of my budget to ships or something else, submarines. And that's okay, because it's in the service of the nation. And if there's a greater need for whatever strategy we're pursuing at the time, that's not a bad thing. And you do have to learn to play nice in that sandbox. Even though you say, I need this, and it's going to cost this much money. And then, the FMB or OSD or Congress or the president reshuffles the decks, the cards in the deck, and you get a lot less money than you thought you needed. So the negotiations there, as you go through the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution cycle it's an interesting thing to see and be a part of, and I enjoy it.
Yeah. So the next line in the oath is that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. That one has a lot of gravity. This passage also originated during the Civil War. Congress and President Abraham Lincoln wanted to ensure that soldiers did not defect. Expanded the oath with that phrase in an attempt to guarantee loyalty. In the final analysis, however, loyalty depends on the integrity of the individual. And all the services focus on that in some way, shape, or form in their core values.
I had an opportunity to visit OCS in Quantico, Virginia, and the colonel in charge of OCS was supposed to give me a briefing on what they do at OCS and how they train their officers, et cetera. And he showed up late. And I know you know this, but Marines don't show up late ever. And he walked into the room and apologized and said, "I'm sorry, we've had an incident on base." So of course I was curious. I said, "What happened? What happened?" He said, "Well, it's serious enough that, we're considering throwing one of our Marines out of OCS, throwing one of our Marines out of the Marine Corps." So I'm thinking, oh my God, what crime did this person commit? I said, "What'd he do?" He said, "He fell asleep on watch." And I said, "That's it? Like he fell asleep on watch in the woods of Virginia and you're going to throw him out of the Marine Corps for that? That's a bit harsh, don't you think?" And he said, "No, you don't understand. When we asked him about it, he denied it. When we asked him about it again, he denied it again. And only when we showed him irrefutable proof did he say, quote, 'I want to take responsibility for my actions.'" He said, "The problem we have is you don't take responsibility for your actions at the time you get caught. You take responsibility for your actions at the time you perform your actions." He said, "We have another Marine that fell asleep. He admitted it. We punished him, but we have no problem with him." And then the colonel went on to explain. He says, "You have to understand, if I put this kid in a leadership position in a combat situation, and his Marines think for 1 minute that he's trying to protect himself at the expense of others, if he's trying to just advance his own career, trust will decline, trust will break, and people will die." And so I started to understand that what it means to lead and what camaraderie means in these environments is literally our lives depend on each other. And I don't have to like you, but I do have to trust you.
This notion corresponds to the Air Force's, for example, the Air Force's core value of integrity first. That's individual integrity. The Marine Corps and the Navy's core value of honor, and the Navy and Marine Corps share the same core values, and the Army's core values of integrity and honor. Integrity is a learned trait. And by the way, it starts not just when you go to boot camp or officer candidate school. It starts with how you're raised in your family by your parents, and the choices you make as an individual to develop and strengthen your integrity over time. Whether that learning is based upon a religious upbringing or an embracing of acceptable norms of society, honor and integrity are part of the core of all the military services. Maintaining integrity is implicit in the oath and must guide officers when they face conflicts of interest and hard choices. And it's nice to say that the U.S. military has had for, I think, decades, a reputation of being one of, if not the most trusted institutions in the country. And that's in great large part due to the individual integrity of every single service member in the military.
Yeah, so following that in the oath, taking the obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, the next phrase is that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. That wording has its genesis in the first statute of 1789. In addition to the standard oath, the Secretary of the Senate and the Clerk of the House of Representatives had to take an additional oath to solemnly swear or affirm that I will truly and faithfully discharge the duties of my said office to the best of my knowledge and abilities. And this clause epitomizes the Air Force's core value of excellence in all we do, the Marine Corps and Navy value of commitment, and the Army's core value of duty. And we must be proactive and perform our duties to the best of our abilities, mastering our specialties while we are junior officers, and then gaining breadth as we advance in rank. The progress of the nation depends upon our doing so.
And before we get too far afield, I wanted to quickly go over what each of the 5 military services core values are, just for everyone's reference. And again, when this was written, the Space Force did not exist, so I have the Space Force's core values also. So the Army's has 7 Army values, often acronymized as leadership, or LDRSHIP, which is loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. The U.S. Navy and the Marine Corps both share honor, courage, and commitment, much more succinct. The U.S. Air Force has integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. And the Space Force, the newest by far of the services, has character, connection, commitment, and courage, all C's. And they're referred to as guardian values. Space Force, they're called the Guardians. So just wanted to share that with everybody. So the next line in the oath is, and Marcus, I want to share this one with you. So I'm gonna go through the first paragraph, and I want to pitch it over to you because this one's, I know, near and dear to both of us a lot. So I don't want to steal all the thunder here. So the last phrase, and in many respects, we think perhaps the most important, is where it ends with, "So help me God." Controversy over the separation of church and state sometimes clouds this final phrase. And if you want to learn more about the separation of church and state and the controversy surrounding that, you can go to our reference, you can reference our episode 26, titled "The Wall That Never Existed." You can hear all about our discussion, our in-depth discussion about the misplaced concept of separation of church and state. But anyway, that concept still pervades a lot of our culture and sometimes clouds this final phrase. Nevertheless, it is the most important one in the oath. Our actions have moral, and for those who believe in a supreme being, even religious implications. Sometimes military officers seem hesitant to embrace their religion publicly or acknowledge the significance of divine guidance. However, American history is replete with examples of public appeals to a higher being for guidance and protection. The Declaration of Independence includes an appeal to, quote, "the supreme judge of the world," unquote. That's in our Declaration of Independence. And although the Constitution does not include the phrase, "So help me God," in the President's oath, Washington added those words when he took the first oath. President Lincoln openly addressed the concept of divine guidance in the Gettysburg Address, where he said, quote, "This nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom," unquote. When the Pledge of Allegiance added the phrase "under God" in 1953, President Dwight Eisenhower commented, quote, in this way, we are reaffirming the transcendence of religious faith in America's heritage and future. In this way, we shall constantly strengthen those spiritual weapons which forever will be our country's most powerful resource in peace and war," unquote. I just love that phrase. In this way, we shall constantly strengthen those spiritual weapons which forever will be our country's most powerful resource in peace and war. That's very powerful and well said.
Amen. And spiritual resilience is still part of at least the Marine Corps. I think it's part of all of the other services as well. I'm just most familiar with the Marine Corps. Commandant actually released a MAR admin on the topic of spiritual resilience. And I don't know if he had Washington's words in mind when he did that, but it's certainly appropriate. And I love that phrasing as well. So Help Me God became part of the officer oath in 1862. But the enlisted oath did not add these words until 1962, 100 years later. The congressional record provides superb insight into their meaning. The words, "So help me God," are not a part of the obligation assumed upon taking the oath. They constitute rather an assertion of sincerity to undertake the duties of military service in good faith and with the aid of the highest power recognized by the enlistee. It is directed solely to his or her personal conception of the Almighty, whatever that might be, or whatever it may not be. There is no effort to impose on the enlistee any established religious conception, or even to require his acknowledgement of any religious conception. For the vast majority of the persons taking the oath, however, this addition will assure the unique degree of personal conviction not otherwise attainable, and will thus prove a welcome source of both personal and national strength. Goes on to say that even atheists have a moral obligation from a societal perspective. One finds this concept as far back as 400 BC, when Sun Tzu, The Art of War, starts his first chapter with the statement, "War is a matter of vital importance to the state. Therefore, appraise it in terms of 5 fundamental factors. The first of these factors is moral influence." Clearly, one of the greatest military minds of all time understood the moral implications of our actions and their importance for success. So help me God also implies retribution if officers do not keep their word. Compare the part of the Soviet oath that ends with, quote, "If I break this solemn vow, may I be severely punished by the Soviet people, universally hated and despised by the working people," unquote. Although that is quite a condemnation, in actuality it is less severe than the potential consequences for someone who has a strong moral or religious foundation. So help me God acknowledges that no stronger commitment exists. Amen.
Amen, indeed. So he concludes this really great article. And by the way, we cut out part of it just for brevity, and he has a really good chart in the article, which we might show if we can find a way to put it in the episode, where he has a side-by-side historical breakdown of how the oath changed in Congress every step of the way, enlisted and officer side by side. So you can see when they were separate, when they became the same, when they were separated again, and when every single line was deliberated upon, which again just shows, from the very first Congress, the very first legislation, and then over 19 times since then, that the Congress takes this oath and took the oath, enlisted an officer, extremely seriously, and for good reason, as I think we've made the case by now. So by studying the key documents and events in America's history, military officers can gain better insight into their oath of office and the moral implications of their actions. Junior officers should focus on how to well and faithfully discharge the duties of their office. For senior officers, the oath should carry even greater significance, as they use a more indirect style of leadership to instill in their followers the service's core values. Officers must develop the skills to make the appropriate leadership decisions when guidance may be vague on how best to support and defend the Constitution. They must take the time to identify capabilities for addressing the entire spectrum of conflict and wrestle with ways of resolving conflicting priorities in coalition warfare. Individuals at all levels must focus on the needs of the nation rather than on the desires of their services alone. Finally, officers must embrace the moral foundation symbolized in the phrase, "So help me God," since it is the heart and soul of the success of future generations of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and I'll add, and Guardians. So really, really well written
Very well said.
article going from the history of it, the importance of it from the very first Congress and throughout Congress for decades, to the moral implications of the oath, to how it should influence our leadership in the military. It actually provides a guide. If you actually understand each phrase of that oath, it provides a guide on leadership, military leadership.
Yeah, it should be mandatory PME for every service member.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's so well done. And hopefully us bringing this up will kind of get, back, shed some light on it again. Because there is a lot of, as the author points out, there's a lot of gray area, especially the higher you go in the military ranks. We're taught to faithfully discharge the duties and, follow orders, I remember in boot camp, we had to recite the phrase, instant and willing obedience to orders, sir, over and over again. But we know that, and we're also taught that we're only to follow lawful orders. And that's where things can sometimes get murky, because it's impossible to have all the laws, rules, and regulations in your head, and the Uniform Code of Military Justice and DOD regulations all memorized in your head to know all the time what is actually a lawful order. And by the way, all those regulations and the UCMJ is built in with some interpretation. Several of the orders in the UCMJ, in fact, can be interpreted in different ways depending on the circumstances on purpose. And it's impossible to have enough regulations to cover for every single thing that could happen in any situation, every single moral dilemma that could happen. So that's where, again, comes down to your individual integrity, your individual foundational core beliefs, whether they be based in religion, based in a belief in God, or not. Either way, your core beliefs have to be examined on a regular basis by every individual, so that when a gray area arises, you're more prepared to make a decision and then be able to stand on that decision.
This is where the rubber meets the road, because we all swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and to obey lawful orders. But who gets to decide what's constitutional? Who decides what is lawful and unlawful? Do you have the individual freedom to decide on your own that something is or isn't constitutional? And while the military is supposed to be apolitical, determining what counts as a constitutional value, determining when the Constitution is under threat, determining how to defend the Constitution, and determining what orders are lawful or unlawful, those are deeply political in practice. And so it really puts the service member in a tough spot, which is why you have to be a person of character and morals. You have to be confident in your own scheme of morality, in your beliefs, and willing to stand for that. It doesn't mean there won't be consequences, though, if your view of the Constitution runs counter to the administration's. It should be done carefully. It should be done prayerfully. At the end of the day, you have to be able to live with yourself. You have to be able to sleep at night, and you have to be clear with your conscience and with God. That is the oath that you took. So help me God. And in that instance, you have to decide before you ever raise your hand and take that oath that if and when that day comes, you will stand by your principles, you'll stand by your conscience, and be a person of character, no matter what it costs. And whether that happens the day you show up to boot camp or officer candidate school, or the day before you retire. You have to be willing to do that. The oath is fulfilled through this discipline, service, adherence to lawful orders, and the use of the established channels to address your grievances. And after you've exhausted all of that, if you're still on the wrong side of the organization, hold to your morals and accept the consequences. Another interesting example of all of this was General Douglas MacArthur. He gave his final farewell address at West Point on May 12th, 1962. And he, in that address, emphasized this point that military personnel should remain focused on their oath, focused on their core values, and steer clear of policy and political disputes. Now, that's an interesting position for MacArthur to take because famously, just 10 years before, in a tremendous irony, General MacArthur and President Harry S. Truman had a disagreement during the Korean War, in which MacArthur openly criticized the administration's handling of the war effort. He even threatened to invade China and defy the civilian leadership's policy. And as a result of that, of course, on April 11th, 1951, President Truman relieved MacArthur as the Supreme Commander of the United Nations Command. And Truman explained that from his perspective, MacArthur did not support the requirements of the Constitution and did not faithfully discharge his duties. Truman said full and vigorous debate on matters of national policy is a vital element in the constitutional system of our free democracy. It is fundamental, however, that military commanders be governed by the policies and directives issued to them in the manner provided by our laws and the Constitution, and in a time of crisis, this consideration is particularly compelling. So MacArthur stuck his neck out in that instance and definitely weighed in on policy matters and political issues. But when he gave his farewell speech to the West Point cadets in 1962, he reminded them, stay true to your oath, stay true to your core values of duty, honor, and country, and steer clear of politics. So this is what General MacArthur had to say.
Duty, honor, country. Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. They are your rallying points to build courage when courage seems to fail, to regain faith when there seems to be little cause for faith, to create hope when hope becomes forlorn. Yours is the profession of arms, the will to win, the sure knowledge that in war there is no substitute for victory, that if you lose, the nation will be destroyed, that the very obsession of your public service must be duty, honor, country. Let civilian voices argue the merits or demerits of our processes of government. Whether our strength is being sapped by deficit financing indulged in too long, by federal paternalism grown too mighty, by power groups grown too arrogant, by politics grown too corrupt, by crime grown too rampant, by morals grown too low, by taxes grown too high, by extremists grown too violent, whether our personal liberties are as thorough and complete as they should be, these great national problems are not for your professional participation or military solution. Your guidepost stands out like a tenfold beacon in the night. Duty, honor, country.
So I wonder
said.
how much of that speech was informed by his introspection on his dust-up with Truman 10 years before. But I did find it interesting
Probably quite a
that
bit.
we swear to support and defend the Constitution, but in MacArthur's view, he says that when we see certain things happening that are pertinent to the Constitution, his advice in that speech to those cadets was to let civilian voices argue the merits or demerits of our processes of government. He said, those great national problems are not for your professional participation or military solution. Your guideposts stand out like a tenfold beacon in the night. Duty, honor, and country.
And if you're thinking about joining the military or you're in the military, you've already taken the oath, it's really incumbent upon you to be very familiar with these concepts, because if you haven't yet, you will face gray areas in your time in the military, and it's best to be prepared for them before they happen.
Yeah, very well said. We covered a lot of ground in this episode. We talked about war, presidential authority, the War Powers Resolution, the headlines coming out of the Middle East, and under all of that, under all of those debates, beneath the politics, the strategy, arguments on Capitol Hill, there is something deeper that anchors the American military tradition. And it's a promise that every service member takes when they enter the armed forces. Every man and every woman who puts on the uniform of the United States takes the same oath. It's an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And it links the generations together. Those words have been spoken by generations of Americans, stretching back to the earliest days. George Washington's soldiers swore it during the Revolution. Union and Confederate soldiers wrestled with that meaning during the Civil War. Every generation since, Normandy, Incheon, Fallujah, Kandahar, everyone has taken that oath. And the power in it lies in what it represents, which was articulated beautifully, I think, by General MacArthur at his farewell address at West Point. Loyalty to the Constitution has to stand above loyalty to any individual or any institution. And it's that principle that is one of America's quiet strengths. In the United States, the military is bound by the law, by tradition, and by an oath that points beyond politics of the moment. And I think that's probably why it still resonates today. Because when young recruits raise their hand and repeat those words, they're joining a chain that stretches across nearly 2.5 centuries of American history. Chain of service, chain of duty, chain of fidelity to the Constitution. Headlines will change, administrations will change, debates will continue, Presidents and members of Congress will come and go, but the oath stays the same. As long as Americans continue to take it seriously, it remains one of the strongest safeguards of the Republic.
Yep, that's the key, taking it seriously. Thanks, Marcus. That was a great discussion, really good deep dive into this really important topic, and I hope that it helps, again, those looking to join or that are already in the military service serving our great country. As always, please, if you found this valuable, share this with your friends and family and others that might be interested. And this podcast is available on all the podcast platforms, Substack, and Spotify, and Apple. I think Apple now, all three have a video format. We're also on YouTube and Rumble. So we got potentially 5 video formats where you can see the podcast as well as listen to it on the regular podcast platforms.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for bringing this topic to us today. I really enjoyed the discussion. A good time for reflection on things that I've thought a lot about in the past, but it's always appropriate to revisit these topics. And I hope it's helpful to other people as well.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks again, Marcus. Good to see you. Thank you. God bless.
See you next time.